This next talk deals with compatibility structures and building collaboration. So again, this is probably a 3-hour section that we're going to jam into 45 minutes. So keep in mind that you do get the PowerPoint later and can spend time prayerfully reflecting on it. So what are we going to look at? We're going to talk about a vision caution. We're going to talk about the importance of culture. And I think this is one of the key insights of the research and work that we've done, is respecting the culture of parishes, of multicultural situations. We're going to look at compatibility. What are the variables? What does it look like? And then we're going to talk about organizational variables. There's a lot of different ways to organize this. In the book on multiple parish pastoring, we came up with 6 models. So far, they've stood the test of time. There are variations, but the 6 models hold fairly tight. And I'm going to go through some of those with you. And then, God willing, we're also going to talk about collaboration and how to build it and what not to do, because there are some not tos in this whole area. So, what is, again, that vision? And this is one of those just personal check if you're in a multi-parish situation in leadership. So what do you think the chances are for greater collaboration? Are they great? Moderate? Not sure? Which is probably the most honest answer for many. Or unlikely? Now, many people don't like unlikely. But I want to suggest to you that it is a legitimate position to be. I was doing this workshop recently down in Jacksonville, and I was talking about the fact that it's okay to not blend everything. And one of the pastors raised his hand. He said, "Oh, I'm so glad to hear you say that." He said, "I had a youth group, and we decided that it was going to be a multicultural youth group. And for 3 years, we tried to get the Anglos and Hispanics to show up, cooperate, work together, and it just didn't work. And a year ago, I made a decision that we were going to have 2 groups, one for the Anglo, one for the Hispanic. And periodically, we'd get together to do some things together. Attendance and membership of both groups jumped exponentially. And yet, when I said we were going to do 2 separate groups, I got all kinds of flack." Right? Does this sound like some of you are nodding your heads? You've had this experience. Okay? Unlikely is a legitimate position to serve people. I was sharing during the break and spending a little more time here on the multicultural, but it's a good example. In Green Bay, many of our Hispanic community come from Mexico. Many of them are very charismatic. We do not have any priests that are bilingual and charismatic. So what happens? We have large numbers of Hispanics who come to church for the Eucharist in the morning and go to the evangelical churches in the afternoon for the Holy Spirit. Now, what's wrong with that model? Right? I mean, how do we, without being a consumer-driven church, still mission-driven, how do we address people's real spiritual needs? That goes bigger than I have time for in this workshop. So how do you decide? Well, the caution here is always, how do you balance, respect, honor the unique history, rituals, and traditions of individual parishes and communities with the desire and need to create an organizational reality that can be new and energizing together? 2 polemics, even in the mission statement of Disciples in Mission for the Archdiocese, there is that dynamic tension that's part of the vision. How do we create a unity while respecting the individual identity? It's like the challenge of parents to nurture roots and wings. How do you keep people planted, but how do you turn them free? I always used to tell my kids that my job was to launch them. They would tell me as a parent that I was so mean. I would say, well, I have to be, otherwise you won't move out when you turn 18. We won't go further on that. There is a handout on culture in your folder, and if you'd pull that out. There's also a very, very good book called Building Intercultural Competence for Ministers, which I highly recommend. It comes from the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops. It's a 5-session kind of a small group experience, especially if you're in a multicultural or multi-parish situation. Good things. Culture, usually when we look at a parish, at a culture, think of an iceberg. And on the top of the iceberg, poking out of the water, is only about 15% of that iceberg. That's what you can see, hear, taste, touch. And many of us think that's culture. When 85% is below the water, it's the things that are internal, the assumptions, the values, the patterns, the myths. It's the things of the heart, the guts, the soul, the ineffable. These are the most important things, especially when you're looking at bringing communities together. And like two icebergs that crash into each other, if all you're looking at is what's on top of the water, you're going to have all kinds of subterfuge under the water. Too many times in looking at multi-parish ministry, we change the externals. We mandate there will be one parish council, there will be one youth ministry, there will be one. We deal with the externals, and we can't understand why people are frustrated. It's because we haven't dealt with what's below the water. So many examples of this in the work that I've done. What are the stories? What are the myths? What are the patterns? I'll give you an example of this. I was out west doing this workshop, and a pastor came up to me and he said, "Oh, I have a great story to share with you. I'm the pastor of St. Mark's and St. Barbara's, 9 blocks away from each other. And I have spent years trying to figure out why these two parishes won't cooperate with each other." He said, "Somebody finally explained it to me. Even though the mines have been closed in this town for 50 years, St. Mark's was built by the mine owners, and St. Barbara's was built by the miners. And even though it's been 50 years, those things subconsciously are handed down generation to generation." I talk with some parishes in my own diocese, and they talk about St. Mary's and St. Patrick's. St. Mary's was the German parish who kicked the Irish out. Have anyone got a history like that? When you talk with seniors, they talk about walking down the street and seeing someone from St. Mary's and going to the other side of the street. They are only 3/4 of a mile away from each other. Because the Irish didn't feel welcome, they had to go build their own church. Now that happened 60 years ago. But they don't know it. They still feel it. Even though they've been linked now for probably 10, 12 years. Culture, the matters of the heart and soul, must be respected when we look at multi-parish ministry. So, compatibility. Now this is another handout. It's the cream-colored one. What are some of those variables that will give you an indicator of what's the likelihood of communities coming together or staying separate? Okay? So, fancy term for this, community cultural exegesis. Doesn't that sound cool? And I think it's critical to know the stories, to know the factors. Each of them play off differently and have to be adapted to unique situations. So, first one is obviously ethnic. Whether it's Irish and German, Hmong, Korean, who are the communities that are within your parish and your parish community? All of them have different ways of celebrating and living their faith. What are the household rituals, traditions? I grew up in a Polish family. The opłatek, Christmas Eve, the breaking of the bread and sharing at the Christmas table, the making sure that we had the butter lamb, okay, at Easter time, bringing at Easter time on Saturday, some of the food that would be shared at Easter for blessing at the church. These were all critical parts of my growing up on the south side of Milwaukee. They need to be respected. Not to expect everyone to start having butter lambs just because there's Polish in the parish, okay, or whatever, but to respect those. So ethnic is one. 2, ecclesial identity. We all know parishes that are the more traditional, the pastor, benevolent, loving, dedicated guy who really doesn't need a parish council or anybody else. Do you know of any like that? Okay. But there's another side too, and we have them in our diocese, as I would guess you do, pastors who have abdicated responsibility for leadership. And you as staff people are put in awkward spots sometimes to be the leaders. What's that ecclesial identity? If you have 2 parishes that come together, one has had a strong pastoral council and finance council, people are empowered, there's 700 ministries, and it's paired with one that has none, what are the chances of them being compatible and coming together? I had a situation in our diocese where 2 parishes, Parish A was what we called a minimalist parish. Pastor's pride and joy was a 34-minute mass. Had a religious ed program, had about 1,000 families, had $2.5 million sitting in the bank. Pretty neat. We linked them with the parish 3 miles away, which was the ministerially complete parish. They had a functioning Catholic school, pastoral associate, business manager. They were broke. What do you think the challenges are coming together? And especially in this situation, we needed to build a new church. Can you imagine the conversation? We're not going to take our $2.5 million to build a church for those people who didn't save. I actually had the guts to suggest to the representatives of these 2 communities that there's this scripture passage, that says, if you have 2 coats and your neighbor has none. And I actually had a guy raise his hand and he said, look, that's that churchy stuff, we're talking money. But think about it in terms of your own, with parishes that you may be paired with. Relative size. Big challenge if you have parish A with 2,000 families linked with parish B 400. Okay? The culture, the decision making, the way people relate. The people in the 400 parish are saying we don't want to be gobbled up. So then they circle the wagons to fight off any cooperation, because if we cooperate even a little, we're going to get gobbled up. So again, a couple of you are nodding your head, you've been there. And the big one's saying, it's okay if they join us. right? So how do you help parishes? I mean, the ideal is 2 parishes of common size. We're actually looking at the merger of 2 parishes that were of common size. And we're going to talk more about change later. But one of the things is when you merge, you take with the whole community and its key symbols. And this is where we were learning early on the hard way. And one of the key symbols of St. Agnes was their statue of St. Agnes. And they actually had a procession, from St. Agnes with the St. Agnes in the back of a pickup truck going down the highway. And when they arrived at the new church said, "Great, we have room in the basement for her." Ouch. Okay, we'll talk more about change later. Economic health. Which one is, again, the example of the $2.5 million in the bank versus just getting by? How do you then look at sharing resources in such a way that you further the mission without getting into the jealousies of mine versus yours? Those take time to work through. Geography. When I first moved to Green Bay 8 years ago, we have a river that goes right down the middle of the city. And I was told that if I plan a meeting on the east side of the river, I also have to do a meeting on the west side because people don't travel that far. You know these. Somebody earlier said that in Boston, you're known not by your address, but by what parish boundary you're in. We have developed a marvelous sense of parochialism, which can get in our way of the bigger mission of the church. But geography, whether it's mountains, river, railroad tracks. I was dealing with a parish this past week that we're looking at consolidating a school, and they told me that the highway that went right across the front of the parish was the dividing line. And on the west side were the people from the farms who have been there for 700 years. And on the other side of that highway is the suburb that's grown up in the last 25 years. Culture, geography, that highway is a key variable. Relational history. In our small towns, high schools and their sports teams play a pivotal role. They can't stand each other. Well, what's that relational history? I told you the story of St. Mary's and St. Patrick's, where the Irish have been kicked out. What's that relational history with the parishes? Have there been any successful collaborations through the years between the parishes? Decision-making. Is it a collaborative decision-making culture? Or is it one with a very strong leader, pastor? Parish and community priorities. If you have parish A that, say, is very strongly committed to a Catholic school, parish B strongly committed to running a homeless shelter. How do you respect those differences without one throwing rocks at the other? I have seen situations where when a school is struggling, they're saying, well, oh, good, let's link together because then we can get more financial support from the other parish. Doesn't always work. And we need to be clear going into these relationships. Staffs. One has a staff, one everything's run by volunteers. You have 2 business managers. What happens now? You look at combining those. Do you maintain 2 parallel staffs? Are they staffs that are empowered and take responsibility? Are they staffs that pretty much do what they're told? Okay? These are very different cultures. Parishioner involvement. I mentioned the one where all the parishioners take care of all the maintenance stuff. And that includes painting insides of churches, electrical, plumbing, everything else, versus the church that has a maintenance man. Okay? How do those come together? Tolerance for change. Had two parishes recently. Parish A had changed pastors 3 times in the last 5 years. Parish B had the same pastor for 24 years. What do you think their tolerance for change was? Okay? It's okay if we share a pastor as long as he lives in our rectory. Okay? Or our pastor of 24 years will be the pastor of this linkage. He's been here forever and we need to respect that. I also serve in our diocese on the priest personnel board. Talk about opportunities for virtuous action. Trying to match the gifts, the skill sets with the complexity that we have. Parish viability. If I came and visited your parish and spent a week there, would I walk away from it saying, wow, what a viable, vibrant parish? Or is it a minimalist parish? Yeah, has a nice religious ed program for the kids and Mass on Sunday, but not much else. Financially, is it an aging parish that if we look at its income over the last 10 years is going straight down? Or is it a growing parish? Those are all key factors in this. Others, you may think of other factors, but these are the key ones that I've experienced. Does anyone here have any other factors in terms of parishes and compatibility? Okay. Yep, we got one in the back there. Got my microphone guys on this so we can get it on the video. Yes?
Their commitment to faith formation.
Absolutely, commitment to faith formation. Where is that in the priority? Commitment to social justice, commitment to outreach to ethnic communities. Yes?
Different spiritualities.
Go ahead.
Different spiritualities.
Okay, say a little more about that.
We're in a collaborative where we now have a neo-catechumenate pastor, and our particular parish has a long history of Jesuit or Ignatian spirituality.
Ah. Great example. Also have Spanish and English speaking. Okay. And even your cultural groups are split in their spirituality. All right. Good examples. How do you respect where people are, but also hold on to the bigger vision? Yes? Geography? Yeah. Mountains.
Geography could be very significant in terms of the
Absolutely.
situation could change dramatically.
Yep. Yep. All right. Okay. One more.
One of them is diocesan boundaries. Sometimes if you're on the edge of a diocesan boundary, it's very difficult because they can cross the line and be much closer to their other linkage partner.
Absolutely.
And there's nothing you can do about that. It's an unfortunate bureaucratic reality.
That's right. Diocesan boundaries can be very significant. Parish boundaries themselves. Now, it's interesting in the Midwest, we've more or less abolished them. So often, and there are advantages and disadvantages to that. The disadvantage is our parishes have lost their sense of responsibility for everyone within a geographic area, whether they're Catholic or not. That's the disadvantage. But the reality is, if you do a scattergram of parishioners, 30, 40, 50% are scattered way beyond parish boundaries. So it's an interesting question about what is parish as we look down the future. So again, we could do a lot more for this, but I want to make sure we get to prayer and a few more other things. I just encourage you to use this paper with your leadership to assess what's a realistic vision for where you are now. It may change, and that's one of the keys. Multi-parish leadership evolves over time. It doesn't just stay in one model. So, what do we share in common that we can build on? and what's unique and special in each community. Let's look at how to organize. That's another handout, the purple one. There is no one way to do this. I wish I could tell you, here's the template, just follow these 14 rules and you'll be happy. There are multiple ways in which, and they all work. Within the Diocese of Green Bay, we have all of these models operating that I'm going to go through in terms of organizational variables. A lot of these come from the book that we wrote and the Emerging Models of Pastoral Leadership project. If you want to actually look at the research, go to the website emergingmodels.org. You can look at the actual detailed research that this comes from. There is also a thing called the Mogilka circles, which I won't bore you with, but they're there as another way of looking at these variables. So, what are the variables? No one way. There's a continuum from centralized to more diverse. That may vary from program, ministry, parish, culture to culture. It's a key question of subsidiarity versus hierarchy. Question is, whose needs are being served by the organizational model chosen? This is a key kind of a balancing challenge. If I'm the pastor or the CEO, all the management books and all the business people in the parish are telling me uniformity, eliminate complexity. And that will serve me because it'll be easier, but you may lose most of your parishioners. So there's a balance between creating a system that is life-giving for you as leaders and manageable, and being sensitive to the unique needs of the cultures and communities you serve. So, first one is the pastor or parish life coordinator. Parish life coordinator, that's the 517 that I described earlier. Okay, so is clearly the leader of each faith community. No question about it. He or she, depending on the ministry, is clearly in charge. No doubt. B, delegates some responsibilities. I was talking with a pastor last week, and he said, I only go to parish council meetings. Finance council, my business manager represents me. Okay? Delegate some responsibilities. Not all. And the business manager has a set of parameters. So the finance council can't decide to cut 3 staff people to balance the budget. So significant change has to come back across the pastor's desk, but it's delegated. C is delegates as much responsibility as possible. I have pastors who hire staff, and these are pastors who would have 3 or 4 parishes, and basically say to the person, look, between you and I, you're in charge. I'm going to be there for sacramental ministry. I'm going to back you up. I'm going to support you. But it's your parish. I want you to run with it, take leadership. It's a pretty radical model. But it is a model that's happening. And my guess is, even though you might not recognize it, it's happening in Boston too. Where somebody on site is kind of delegated the responsibility to take major responsibility for the day-to-day operation of the parish. So this is an uncomfortable model because this isn't the way it's written up in canon law. But it exists as a reality. What about staff training and formation? Highly professional staff on one end. Deacons, religious, lay with master's degrees, 3 to 5 years experience. They could be parish life coordinator. Increasingly, I don't know what your experience is, but in the Midwest, going to more part-time paid people. And the requirements for leadership in ministry are eroding. And several of you are nodding your heads, you're seeing some of that too. Whereas before we had a master's degree person running the religious ed program, now it's a bachelor's degree. Or somebody who's gone through our commissioned ministry program. Trained, informed volunteers, depending on the complexity of the parish, especially in our small town rural parishes. This is a common model. The key is the training and formation, not just delegating responsibility for which there's no training or mentoring. And then, of course, volunteers. We have some people who are well-intentioned, because they're not in a good environment, are not mentored, supervised, formed, and that creates some real problems. Next one is staff organization. Consolidated, they all work at one site. Again, this is kind of an ideal model from a management perspective. But what happens when there's no staff people at one of the parish? Okay? People in the parishes get very nervous because they say, oh, they're going to shut us down, right? So I have models which are kind of the midpoint, mixed. Maybe the business manager, pastoral associate, DRE are at one site, but there's still a full-time secretary. The office is open. It's an important symbol. In much of this, it's the symbol that's important, not necessarily the reality. We'll talk more about that. Next is separate, except for the pastor. Parallel systems. Nothing changes. This, based on research, is the worst model for pastors. Because then they have to do shuttle diplomacy and running back and forth between sites. It's not the best model. What about councils, advisory, and coordinating committees? There's one pastoral and one finance council. I think it's interesting in the collaborative model of Boston, there's going to be one pastoral council, but two separate finance councils. I'm real curious to see over time how that works. I'm not saying it can't, I just think it'll be interesting to see how it works. It is interesting, too, in the guidelines that there is kind of a provision for interparish but site-specific committees. So my guess is that in some of those single pastoral councils, you're going to have the subcommittee that deals with the unique festivals, rituals for St. Michael's, and a subcommittee that's going to deal with the unique festivals, rituals for St. Mary's. And I would encourage that there be that respect. But they would be subcommittees still of the pastoral council. And then, of course, each has its own council. That, again, is not the most effective. I like more of the hybrid over time, taking steps. 31% of multiple parishes do share a pastoral council or coordinating committee. The community identity is the focus on one parish, one community. We have parishes, and I don't advise this, who are consolidated, merged. They have a new name, and they talk about the worshiping committee on Taylor Street and the worshiping committee on Johnson Street. It does violence to the foundational identity of the people from those parishes. Okay? It's better to have Holy Family Parish that worships at St. Michael's and St. Barbara's than to try to obliterate. I think in our naivete early on, we would say, oh, we're now one. We've dealt with the stuff above the iceberg, above the water, and that you can't even mention the former parishes. I think that's a mistake. I think we need to honor our roots. Some of our parishes that have merged annually celebrate the feast day of the former parishes. A way of honoring that foundation. And you shouldn't be afraid of that. It affirms people where they are. The goal is balance, being one, but affirming the unique communities. I think this is the vision that the Archdiocese has, at least in its documents. And the last is very distinct communities. Cooperate on hardly anything. And in some instances, this may not be the worst model, especially if it's causing more friction, because no one is going to be part of a community that's embattled. Competition is too great among other denominations that are more than happy to welcome our parishioners in, where there isn't conflict and anger and rage. It's a big challenge when we're going through these kinds of transitions. What about worship site identity? One is the center or the mother church. We've been here forever. Okay, so the Triduum should all happen here. Sound familiar or an issue? Of course it's an issue. You know, is there one that clearly does have that identity? Is that helpful? In some instances it might be, especially if you have 3, 4 parishes and one is clearly the largest worship site. You want to really gather the whole community. But when they're common-sized, can you share? Even the Triduum. Holy Thursdays in Parish A, Good Friday Parish B, Holy Saturday Parish C. Affirm each of them. That's another one of the options. So there tends to be a favorite, but each parish holds on to its identity in as many programs as possible. That kind of gray middle area. And as a way of processing perhaps towards greater unity, might not be a bad place to be for a while. And C, each church is fairly equal, okay, in its use and identity. Again, that's one of the tougher models in terms of dispersion of resources. Ministries and services, all out of one location. Volunteers serve equally at each site. You get into, a multi-parish situation, will the lectors only lecture at their church? Or liturgical ministers? No, only at St. Mary's. Or have you been able to invite people to move beyond? The most effective thing to help people move beyond is the common choir during the Triduum. Everybody loves a big choir, including choir members. And it's one of the most successful things I've seen in helping build the bridges. Some shared, some site-specific. Each site, completely it's separate. Building collaboration. We're chugging towards the end. If you look at Loughlin's Sofield, has done the best work on collaboration. It's a process. It doesn't happen because of a parish or a paper dictate merging or creating the collaboration. It's something that evolves over time. It starts with coexistence. Talk more about change after lunch and how to facilitate it. But you start with just letting people relax. Try to change as little as you absolutely have to. Let people relax where they are when you first come into these relationships. Then look at some cooperation. Not on everything, but at least on a few things. Collaboration comes later. We really work together on a common project. And in some cases, you may even get to consolidation. A lot more that can be said about this process, but you're aware. And for some of these parishes, this is a 2 to 4 year process. It's not something that's going to happen in the first 6 months. Can't mandate love, passion, and compatibility. You have to grow into it. You know, we say that if you know two parishes are going to be coming together and there's a marriage coming, start dating now. Okay, so for those of you who know, who you're going to be collaborating, in a collaborative with, start now. Break down some of those walls, those fears. Get acquainted. Build some of that trust, those relationships now. There's an enablement process, too, as a way of coming together. Maybe initially one parish says, well, we'll do the Lent adult ed program. And everyone's welcome. May not get a lot of people the first year because we're pretty parochial. But it's okay to start with I do. Next, we're planning next year's adult ed program for Lent. Do you have any suggestions of speakers or topic or something like that? Get them at the advice level. Third, I do, they help. Would you help us with registration? Would you introduce one of the speakers? Would they help in some way? Before you get to 4, we do. We've been doing the adult ed program for 3 years. We've been working together. It's always held at St. Mary's. How about if the first night is at St. Mary's and we alternate sites and we do it together? In a few cases, you can even go to the next level, they do, because it's such a good and life-giving experience. How do you build unity? Build on win-win. Take your time. Build bridges. Sometimes they're very small bridges. It's okay. Don't set unrealistic expectations. Focus on superordinate goals. Does anyone know what a superordinate goal is? I didn't either. Until I studied social psychology again. And what they find is that if you want to foster unity between two groups that are disparate, what you do is you don't focus on the goal of unity. What instead you do is you set up subtasks that people work on together, and because they've worked together, they'll grow into unity. So what are the subtasks? Organize an inter-parish task group. Best example I can give you of this, we have a mission in the Dominican Republic, and we have a project where for raising $5,000, you can build a chapel or one of the campos out in the hinterlands. Get 2 parishes working together to raise that money. Together, they feel the sense of accomplishment and pride when they see this structure, when they get a letter from that community thanking them for the fiscal support. It builds relationship, okay, as people work on that fundraiser. Over time, more of those projects, you'll foster the unity. Another one is organize inter-parish faith sharing groups. We have Renew, has a 6-session small group program that they're piloting right now, specifically for parishes that are consolidating and inter-parish. You get people from different parishes talking with each other. Organize inter-parish renewal opportunities. Do you have Christ Renews His Parish? You know what that is? Okay, Christ Renews His Parish is basically a retreat program that is done in the parish by the parish. An intensive weekend kind of an experience for parishioners. We have situations where we take parishioners from multiple parish sites, put them through that intensive weekend. It's like Cursillo. How many of you have heard of Cursillo? Okay, it's like a Cursillo type experience that's transformative. And at the beginning of the weekend, everybody talks about, well, I'm from St. Mary's, I'm from St. Barb's, I'm from St. Bob's. By the end of the weekend, they're talking about, no, together we're from Holy Family. But again, it's a superordinate goal. it isn't the big one, and over time you can build towards that unity. So, in summary, the importance of culture, cultural exegesis, organizational variables, and we've quickly talked about how to build unity or some of the strategies.